international efforts to diffuse tensions in Kosovo are stepping up as ethnic Serbs held more protests today in a town where clashes broke out this week between demonstrators as well as NATO peacekeepers. NATO is sending 700 more troops to bolster its force there. We had that from Jens Stoltenberg yesterday after dozens were hurt amid the protests on Monday. The US responding by sidelining Kosovo from joint NATO exercises, blaming its leaders for aggravating a tense situation. This is what France's Emmanuel Macron had to say, rebuking Kosovo.
We have very clearly indicated to Kosovar authorities that it was a mistake to proceed with these elections in this type of context, which is an almost complete non-participation. The Kosovar authorities bear responsibility for some of the current situation, and there was a non-respect of an agreement that was important and that was signed only a couple of weeks ago.
Well, Scott McLean is following the story for us here in London. And Scott, context is really important here. Before we talk about what we've seen this week and in previous weeks, just talk us through the context of this region that goes back decades, of course.
Yeah, so it's important to know a bit of the history here. So Kosovo declared its independence from Serbia in 2008. Many countries around the world, including the US, many in Europe, recognized that independence, but Serbia did not, but it was...
As one of four, it doesn't recognize it from what I understand.
Some important ones don't recognize it,
Indeed.
including Russia. But what I thought it was very interesting what the president actually told you last hour, which is that it's not really a question anymore. So he's not explicitly acknowledging the independence, but he's sort of in a roundabout way saying, look, this is the reality. It's also important to know the ethnic makeup of this region. So Kosovo is more than 90% ethnic Albanian, with some exceptions, including there's 4 municipalities here. There's another smaller one that's right about there that are majority Serb. And these regions don't want to be ruled by the powers that be in Kosovo. And this has caused all kinds of problems, so much so that 10 years ago, 2013, Kosovo and Serbia actually agreed on this document. It's called the Brussels Agreement. It essentially gives these regions some level of autonomy, something that President Vučić told you was still a major issue that it wants Kosovo to actually implement. It gives them some autonomy over education and health. It says that the police chief should be an ethnic Serb and that neither Serbia nor Kosovo will interfere with each other's attempts to join the EU. The problem is that most of this was never actually implemented, which, as the president pointed out, he blames the Kosovars because it's mostly theirs to actually implement. And so that brings us to back in March, Kosovo and Serbia agreed on this, which is sort of renewing their commitment to the Brussels Agreement and explicitly acknowledging that if they can't figure out how to actually implement this, there will be consequences from the European Union.
But it hasn't been implemented, and that is why we have seen protests in these northern parts of the country. Just talk us through why they're so angry in the north of Kosovo.
Yeah, and again, President Vučić told you quite plainly that these local elections were a big problem because there's legitimacy issues. So essentially, ethnic Serbs in these northern municipalities didn't vote in the local elections by and large. They boycotted. And so you had voter turnout that overall was 3.4%, pretty piddly, especially considering when this municipality, the mayor that was elected there only had 141 votes. There is obviously a legitimacy question here, which is why ethnic Serbs in that area protested, tried to block the mayors from actually entering the town halls. They're
very violent protests, may I add, as well.
Well, they were violent last week, but they got even more violent on Monday when you had ethnic Serbs and NATO peacekeeping forces clashes. There were explosions. There were some 30 NATO peacekeepers who were injured. And yeah, this was a very ugly scene there, all prompted by Kosovo's insistence on having these mayors who don't have a lot of legitimacy given the boycott of the vote, actually entering these municipal offices.
So you heard a little clip from Macron, we heard from the NATO Secretary General as well, Jens Stoltenberg, calling for peace. Where does the US stand in all of this?
Yeah, they were quite plain about this in blaming Kosovo, specifically the Kosovo Prime Minister for this, and not responding to their requests to de-escalate things. So this is what the ambassador told journalists. He said this was a crisis that, from our perspective, was unnecessary. The operation that took place on Friday to obtain access to municipal buildings through forcible means was not coordinated with the U.S. When we became aware of it, we advised strongly against it because we anticipated consequences we are now seeing. And so he said there's 2 things that the U.S. is expecting from the Kosovo Prime Minister, and that is that the mayors are not going to work from the town hall. They want them to work at alternate sites because they're largely doing administrative work.
But just on that, when I spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday, he did not sound like he was going to budge on this, or in fact on this.
Exactly. And this is despite pressure from the European Union and the US. He was pretty defiant. Listen.
I'm working closely with international factors, especially with the United States and European Union. We consider both of them indispensable allies, friends, and partners, and we will do our best. But I am not surrendering Democratic Republic to fascist militia.
And so now you have the U.S. Essentially canceling Kosovo's participation in some military drills that are actually taking place right now. They're taking place over 2 months in Romania. The ambassador also explained that, look, there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm right now on the United States' part to advocate for Kosovo. It's one of its most important allies, if not its most important ally, when it comes to countries that don't recognize their independence. And they've made clear that, look, if they can't de-escalate the situation, there may be more consequences.
And that's what is needed right now. It needs to de-escalate. Scott, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Well, yesterday I spoke with Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti, as you heard Scott mentioning there, who referred to the protests, as you heard in that clip, as Serbian fascists. And he accused Belgrade of stirring up violent opposition to the elections. Well, in the last hour, I put those claims to Serbia's president, Aleksandar Vučić, condemned Kurti's accusations, said he wants to stabilize the situation. Have a listen.
We do regret the fact that there were some NATO soldiers injured. And that's what we publicly said immediately after it happened. Yesterday and today, we faced very peaceful protests. And there were physicians, nurses, teachers, everybody was protesting. Were those people blackmailed by someone? No. Those people, they just want to see Kosovo Special Police Forces withdrawing from those premises that has never, ever belonged to them.
We will talk about that, but let me ask this.
You're calling illegitimate and illegal mayors as well.
You're calling for calm, Mr. President. Is that call for calm also going to those northern municipalities? Do you have control over those protesters?
I don't have any kind of control, but I believe that most of those people will always show respect to the state of Serbia. And what we can do with our international interlocutors, with our partners from European Union, United States, all the others from all over the world, is that we need to have a stable region.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying this? Because Serbia, when I say Serbia, it means 50% of overall Western Balkans economy. It means 63% of attracting foreign direct investments of an entire region. We don't need any kind of escalation. What we need is peace.
And
that's why we proposed an open Balkan initiative.
And
that's why we need
to see, of course,
to have freedom of movement and everything else.
No one wants to see, Mr. President, an escalation here. I don't think anyone's calling for an escalation. But let me just ask you this. Look, our colleague kind of broke down for us what's at the heart of this. And it's the fact that Serbia doesn't recognise Kosovo as an independent and sovereign nation. What would it take, Mr. President, for Serbia to acknowledge Kosovo's independence?
It's not anymore even a question, because if you noticed what we were speaking about through Franco-German plan, what we were speaking about in Ohrid, it's about normalization. It's a process of normalization. That's a precondition for Serbia's future progress